An HOA president saw a 100-year-old oak tree as a problem. It was old and it blocked the view from her sunroom, so she had it cut down while the owner, a frail, elderly man, watched in tears from his window. She thought she was exercising her petty authority. She believed the man was too weak to fight back, and that his son, who had just moved home to care for him, was a nobody. She was wrong. That tree wasn't just a tree, it was a legally protected town landmark, an irreplaceable piece of history. And the son wasn't a nobody. He was Alex Vance, one of the most ruthless environmental lawyers in the country, a man who had built a career forcing corporate giants to pay millions for destroying natural assets. Karen Bingham thought she was solving a minor landscaping issue. She had no idea she had just handed a legal predator the perfect case and a deeply personal reason to utterly and publicly dismantle her life.
Before we go deeper into this story, please do make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps us create more stories of justice, just like this one. Now, let's get back to the story. Karen Bingham had no idea that her decision to solve a landscaping issue would trigger the events of that sunny Tuesday morning. For her, it was just business. For my father, it was the end of a world. The day began peacefully. My father, David, sat in his favorite armchair by the living room window. The morning light filtered through the sprawling branches of the centennial oak, casting dancing patterns on the floor, just as it had for every morning of his life in that house. He wasn't just looking at a tree. He was looking at a lifetime of memories, picnics under its shade, a tire swing I'd fallen from a dozen times, the initials of my mother and him, carved into the trunk 50 years ago, now softened with age. That piece was shattered by the roar of a chainsaw. My phone rang at my office downtown. It was my father. His voice was a choked, panicked whisper, cracking with a pain I hadn't heard since my mother's funeral. "They're killing it, Alex," he said, his words barely getting out. "They're killing the tree." I don't remember the drive home. I just remember a cold dread coiling in my stomach. I pulled onto our street and saw it. Or rather, I saw where it should have been. The sky felt horribly empty. A crew was feeding the last of the magnificent branches into a wood chipper, which screamed as it spat out a spray of shredded leaves and wood. In the center of the lawn was a raw, ugly stump, looking like a fresh wound in the earth. My father was standing on the porch, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. I walked him back inside, my mind struggling to process the sheer violation of it all. As I closed the door, I saw a piece of paper taped to the wood. It was a notice. The paper felt flimsy and cheap, the toner already smudged. In cold, impersonal font it read, "Notice of bylaw enforcement. Removal of nuisance vegetation completed." Beneath it was the logo of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. A cold stillness settled over me. The grief was still there, a hot lump in my throat. But something else was crystallizing beneath it. Something hard, sharp, and patient. They didn't just cut down a tree. They had picked a fight with the wrong family. The cold stillness that settled over me wasn't just anger, it was focus. For the last 2 years, my world had been about taking care of my father, doctor's appointments, medication schedules, quiet evenings watching old movies. The part of me that had thrived in the cutthroat world of corporate law had gone dormant. Now, I could feel it waking up. I made sure my father was comfortable in his room, giving him a mild sedative the doctor had prescribed for moments of high stress. His hand trembled in mine, his eyes still looking out the window at the ghost of the tree. "She hated it, you know," he whispered, always complaining about the leaves in her perfect garden. He was talking about Karen Bingham, the HOA president, the name on the bottom of the notice. A piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't random, it was targeted. I went to my home office, the flimsy notice in my hand. I smoothed it out on my desk. Notice of bylaw enforcement. The language was intentionally vague. Nuisance vegetation, a term so broad it was legally meaningless without specific documented proof. There were no bylaw numbers cited, no dates of prior warnings, no opportunity to appeal. It was a coward's document designed to look official while offering no actual substance. My lawyer's brain, now fully engaged, saw it for what it was, a declaration of power, not of process. It was the work of a bully who believed they were untouchable. I looked up the number for the HOA and found her name, Karen Bingham. I took a slow, deep breath, centering myself. The goal was not to yell. The goal was to listen, to give her the rope and see if she would hang herself with it. I pressed dial. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and impatient. Yes? Hello, my name is Alex Vance. I live at 121 Oak Street. I'm calling about the tree that was cut down on my property this morning. I kept my voice perfectly level, calm, and professional. There was a slight pause. Oh yes, she said, and the condescension dripped from every syllable. The dead oak. We had to take care of it. It's all settled. I'm afraid it isn't, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. First, the tree was not dead. It was a healthy, 100-year-old landmark. Second, we received no prior notification as required by the town charter and, I'm sure, your own bylaws. She let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Look, Mr. Vance, is it? I'm very busy. We sent multiple warnings. 2 by mail, 1 left on your door. If you choose to ignore them, that's not the HOA's problem. The tree's roots were also becoming a potential hazard to the public sidewalk. Bylaw 7.4a is very clear on hazardous vegetation. The matter is closed. It was a fire hose of lies, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had never been challenged. I knew for a fact no notices had arrived. My father, a meticulous man his entire life, sorted the mail every single day. He would have shown me anything from the HOA immediately. And a potential hazard? That was legal weasel speak for, I don't have any actual proof. Could you provide me with the dates those warnings were supposedly sent? I asked, my voice still even. And could you also forward me the arborist's report that deemed the tree a hazard? I don't have that information at my fingertips, she snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin, and we are not required to provide you with our internal reports. We are a volunteer board, Mr. Vance. We work very hard to maintain the property values of this neighborhood, and that sometimes means making tough decisions that people like you don't appreciate. People like me? I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. People who don't maintain their property, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. That tree dropped leaves everywhere. It was an eyesore. Now it's gone. You should be thanking us. I was done. I had everything I needed. I had her on record with a series of blatant, provable lies. I had her admitting the motive was aesthetics, not safety. Best of all, I had a recording of the entire smug performance. Thank you for your time, Karen, I said. And for the first time I let a sliver of ice enter my voice. You've been very illuminating. I hung up before she could respond. I sat there in the silence of my office, the echo of her voice in my ear. The grief for the tree was still a hot ache in my chest, but now it was contained, packed down by a cold, clear purpose. She hadn't just lied. She had constructed a reality she thought she could impose on others through sheer force of will. The casual mention of bylaw 7.4a, the phantom warnings, the fake concern about the sidewalk, it was a performance for an audience of one. She assumed I was powerless, uninformed, and easily intimidated. She thought she was talking to a grieving son. She had no idea she had just been cross-examined by the man who was going to take everything from her. The phone call with Karen Bingham changed the battlefield. My father's grief and my own personal anger were the fuel, but the call gave me a map. Her lies were the coordinates, and I was going to visit every single one. My first move couldn't be a frontal assault. A good lawyer knows you never file a suit until your evidence is stacked so high your opponent is buried before they even enter the courtroom. I needed to dismantle her story piece by piece, starting with her claim that the tree was a hazard. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the neighborhood. It wasn't random. I was canvassing with a purpose, observing the subtle cues of suburban politics. I saw the houses with pristine, chemically treated lawns and noted the ones with Karen Bingham for HOA president signs from the last election still proudly displayed. Those doors I skipped. I was looking for something different, a garden with native plants instead of sterile turf. A slightly faded protest sign for a local library. Anything that suggested an independent thinker. The first few conversations were dead ends. One neighbor, a man polishing his already gleaming SUV, refused to make eye contact. "I don't get involved," he mumbled, practically running back inside. He was scared. Karen's power, I realized, was built on that quiet fear. Another neighbor, a woman watering her petunias, was one of Karen's lieutenants. "Oh, that old thing," she said, pursing her lips. "It was a mess. Frankly, we're all relieved it's gone. It really brings up the look of the street." She was parroting the party line. I was starting to feel a chill of isolation, a sense that Karen had the neighborhood locked down. Then I saw it. 3 houses down from mine, there was a small, beautifully kept home with a garden that was a riot of life, wildflowers, bee boxes, and a magnificent Japanese maple in the front yard. On the porch sat a man in his late 70s, reading a book. I walked up the path. "Excuse me," I said. "My name is Alex Vance. I live down the street. I was wondering if I could ask you about the oak tree that was cut down this morning." The man looked up, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He studied me for a long moment before he spoke. "It was a crime," he said, his voice a low rumble of indignation. "A damn crime. My name is George Peterson. Come on up." As I stepped into his house, I felt like I was entering a different world. It smelled of old books and rich soil. Every surface was covered with botany textbooks, horticultural journals, and small thriving plants. This was not just a hobbyist. This was a man who had dedicated his life to trees. "I was a certified arborist for 45 years, he said, as if reading my mind. "I consulted for the state parks. I know trees, son, and I knew that one." He listened intently as I recounted my father's distress and my phone call with Karen. With every word I spoke, a look of weary recognition deepened on his face. "That's Karen's playbook," he sighed, shaking his head. "Rules for thee, but not for me. She's been trying to get rid of that oak for years because it sheds leaves on her precious English roses. She called it a hazard? That's a laugh. I have pictures." My heart skipped a beat. "Pictures?" "I'm a bit of a nature photographer in my retirement," he said, walking over to a computer. He clicked a few times, and then turned the monitor towards me. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. The centennial oak, in all its glory, silhouetted against a setting sun. The photo was dated. Last week. It was bursting with life, its branches thick with lush green leaves. It was the absolute, undeniable proof that the tree was healthy. "This is incredible, George," I said, feeling the first real spark of hope. "This torpedoes her entire hazard argument." "That's not all," he said, a fire lighting up in his eyes. He was angry now, not just for me, but for the tree itself. "She's arrogant. She gets so caught up in her little HOA kingdom that she forgets there are laws bigger than her. She thinks the HOA bylaws are the word of God." He paused, and a new thought seemed to strike him. "Wait a minute." He walked over to a tall, dusty bookshelf overflowing with binders and faded municipal documents. He ran his finger along the spines, murmuring to himself, "Township Planning Board, Zoning, 1958. Ah, here we go." He pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder and blew a cloud of dust off the cover. He laid it on the table and opened it carefully. The pages were old and yellowed. It was the original development charter for the entire neighborhood, from when it was first built. "When they planned this community," George said, his finger tracing a line on an old map, "the developers agreed to preserve certain natural features. It was a condition of their permit from the town." He flipped through a few more pages, his finger stopping on a specific paragraph. He slid the book towards me. And there it was, in clear, unambiguous type. Article 4, Section 2. Designated heritage trees. The Quercus alba, commonly known as the white oak, located at Lot 121, shall be designated a town heritage tree. Its removal is prohibited without a majority vote from the Township Planning Board and a certified, independent arborist report confirming imminent danger to public safety. I stared at the words, reading them again and again. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile I reserved for the moment in a deposition when I knew I had won. This wasn't just a violation of a flimsy HOA rule. This was a violation of the town charter. Karen Bingham hadn't just made a mistake. She had broken the law. George saw the look on my face and grinned. "She didn't know," he said, a note of pure satisfaction in his voice. In all her years of terrorizing people with her little rulebook, she never bothered to read the one that actually mattered. I looked from the beautiful photo of my family's tree to the ancient, powerful words in the town charter. I now had the truth, and I had the law. The foundation of Karen Bingham's world was about to crack. I walked out of George Peterson's house feeling like a different person. The grief was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it had been reforged into something else. It was no longer the heavy, shapeless sorrow of a victim. It was the cold, hard, perfectly weighted anger of a predator who had just been handed a map to his prey. I thanked George, promising to keep him updated. He simply nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Give her hell, son," he said. Back in my own house, I checked on my father. He was asleep, the sedative having granted him a temporary peace. I closed his door quietly and walked into my home office. This was my sanctuary. For the past 2 years, it had been mostly dormant, a place to pay bills and answer emails. Now, it came to life. I powered on the dual monitors, the familiar hum a comforting sound. I logged into my professional accounts, LexisNexis, Westlaw, the State Bar's private database of case law. The quiet, caring son who made soup and managed medications was gone. Alex Vance, the lawyer, was back. The first thing I did was pull up the town charter George had shown me. I downloaded a certified copy from the municipal archives. That was Exhibit A, the foundation. Next, I uploaded the audio file from my call with Karen. I ran it through a transcription software, the words appearing on the screen, cold and damning. Her lies, her condescension, her admission that the tree was an eyesore. It was all there. Exhibit B. Then came the photo George had given me. I saved the high-resolution file, its metadata clearly showing the date it was taken. A perfect image of a thriving, healthy tree just days before its execution. Exhibit C. With my core evidence secured, the real work began. This was the part of the job I loved, the architecture of a legal case. Karen and her board of petty tyrants thought this was about a tree. They were about to learn it was about negligence, malice, and a level of legal and financial pain they couldn't even comprehend. On one screen, I started drafting the demand letter. On the other, I built the fortress of legal precedent that would back it up. First, the actual damages. This was the simple part. I contacted a specialty nursery that deals in mature trees. Replacing a 100-year-old oak was impossible, but I got a quote for the largest, most mature white oak they could possibly transplant. The cost, including transport and labor, was a staggering $22,000. That was our starting number. But I was just getting warmed up. This wasn't about replacement cost. This was about punishment. I dove into case law on property damage, specifically looking for precedents involving willful and malicious destruction. I found a case from a few years back where a developer had bulldozed a protected wetland. The judge had awarded triple the actual damages as a punitive measure, writing in his decision that a penalty must be significant enough to deter not just the offender, but all who would contemplate such an act. I bookmarked it. Karen's recorded lies and her clear personal motive, clearing the view for her sunroom, were the keys to unlocking punitive damages. Now, for the masterstroke. This was where my specialty came into play. For years, I had fought massive corporations who thought they could pollute a river or clear-cut a forest and just pay a small fine. I had write the very legal frameworks for valuing what they destroyed. It was called environmental asset valuation. I began to calculate the true value of the centennial oak. I found studies quantifying the monetary value of a mature oak's ecosystem services, its role in absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the thousands of gallons of stormwater its root system managed every year, preventing erosion and reducing strain on the town's drainage systems, the measurable increase in property values for all the surrounding homes, a benefit known as amenity value. I built a spreadsheet citing every source, every study. The numbers climbed, each one a testament to the living, breathing value of what Karen had destroyed out of pure spite. The total for these services, amortized over a conservative future lifespan, came to over $15,000. Finally, I researched precedents for infliction of emotional distress, specifically in cases involving the elderly. The law takes the abuse of vulnerable people very seriously. Karen hadn't just confronted me, she had caused my frail father, a man with a documented heart condition, severe and acute mental anguish. I found a similar case where a jury awarded $10,000. It was a modest but legally solid claim. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the numbers: $22,000 for replacement, $15,000 in lost environmental and amenity value, $10,000 for emotional distress. The total was $47,000. I rounded it up to an even $50,000 to account for my own legal fees. It was a shocking number. It was also a deeply researched, legally defensible, and utterly terrifying one. I turned back to the demand letter. I wrote it not with fire, but with ice. It was calm, professional, and brutally direct. It laid out the facts, the tree's protected status, the lack of notice, the violation of the town charter. It referenced, without including, the photographic evidence of the tree's health and the audio recording of our conversation. I wanted her to imagine what I had. I concluded the letter with the demand for $50,000, payable within 30 days to avoid litigation. I hit print. The quiet whir of the printer was the only sound in the room. It felt like the arming of a missile. This letter wasn't a request. It was a countdown. And Karen Bingham's world was about to be the blast zone. I sent the letter via certified mail the next morning. The green and white receipt was a formal, tangible thing. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a legal document. A timer had started. The delivery confirmation pinged on my phone 2 days later. The package had been signed for by K. Bingham. Now, I waited. This part of the process is a unique kind of silence. It's the quiet moment after a sniper has squeezed the trigger, but before the bullet has found its mark. You've done the work. The math is perfect. The trajectory is set. All you can do is watch and wait for the inevitable impact. I wasn't anxious. I was curious. I had presented her with a clear, legally sound path to de-escalation. Her response would tell me everything about the war she wanted to fight. A week later, the war she wanted became very clear. The setting for her fatal miscalculation was the Oak Ridge HOA's monthly board meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. The 4 board members sat at a long folding table, facing a handful of resident attendees who were mostly there to complain about overgrown hedges or overflowing recycling bins. This was Karen Bingham's kingdom. She sat at the head of the table, radiating an aura of supreme authority. To her right was Barry, the treasurer, a man whose primary contribution was to agree loudly with everything Karen said. To her left was Cynthia, the secretary, a woman who wielded her pen and notepad like weapons, documenting every perceived slight against the board. Karen called the meeting to order, breezing through the old business with practiced efficiency. Then she paused, a dramatic glint in her eye. "And now," she announced, her voice laced with theatrical gravity, "for our main item of new business." She held up my letter, pinching it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a dirty tissue. "We have received a demand from Mr. Alex Vance, the resident at 121 Oak Street." She began to read the letter aloud. Her tone was mocking, filled with exaggerated pauses and sarcastic inflections. When she got to the part about the tree's protected status under the town charter, she scoffed. When she read the valuation of its ecosystem services, Barry let out a loud snort of derisive laughter. Then she reached the final paragraph. "Therefore, we demand payment in the amount of $50,000. She stopped, letting the number hang in the air. She looked around the room, a smug smile playing on her lips. The room erupted. It wasn't outrage. It was laughter. Deep, belly-shaking, condescending laughter. The other board members were howling, wiping tears from their eyes. Even the few residents in attendance were chuckling, shaking their heads at the sheer audacity. $50,000, Barry choked out, slapping the table, "for a pile of firewood." Karen let the laughter die down, savoring the moment. "As you can see, we are dealing with someone who is clearly unhinged. However, as per our procedure, we have consulted with our legal counsel." She gestured to a man at the end of the table I hadn't noticed before. He was small and wore a suit that was slightly too big for him. "Mr. Henderson," Karen said, "could you please share your professional assessment?" Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. He was the kind of small-town lawyer who handled house closings and traffic tickets, and he was clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. "Thank you, Karen," he said, nodding sagely. "I have reviewed the letter. In my professional opinion, this is what we call a bluff. It's a standard intimidation tactic. The valuation is pure fantasy. No court in this state would ever award such a ridiculous sum for a tree. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. This Mr. Vance has probably printed off some things from the internet. He's trying to scare you into a quick payout. He has no case. Karen beamed. This was exactly what she and the board wanted to hear. Their own lawyer was validating their arrogance. "So, what do you recommend we do?" she asked. "You must project strength," Henderson said, his confidence swelling. "Do not engage with his ridiculous demands. You send a firm, clear message that you will not be bullied. Offer him a nuisance settlement, something small. It shows you are acting in good faith, but it also shows you find his claim laughable." The board members nodded in unison, their faces set with grim self-importance. They weren't just a board anymore. They were a council of war, and they were about to deliver a crushing counter-offensive. "I have already taken the liberty of drafting a response," Cynthia, the secretary, chirped, sliding a piece of paper in front of Karen. Karen read it, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. It was perfect. 2 days later, a crisp white envelope from the Oak Ridge HOA appeared in my mailbox. It was not from a lawyer. It was on the board's official letterhead. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It stated that the board found my claim to be frivolous and without merit. It accused me of harassing a volunteer board with outlandish demands. Then came the offer. As a gesture of goodwill, and to consider this matter closed, the board is prepared to offer you a $500 gift card to the local Garden Depot. Furthermore, we demand a written apology for your hostile and unprofessional tone, to be delivered to the board within 10 business days. I read the letter twice. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I folded it carefully and placed it next to the other exhibits on my desk. This letter was Exhibit D. It was the fatal miscalculation. It was the signed confession of their own arrogance. They thought they were ending a fight. They had just given me the final piece of evidence I needed to win the war. The letter from the HOA, with its insulting offer of a gift card and its demand for an apology, was the last piece of the puzzle. It was a signed confession of their own hubris. In the world of litigation, this is called acting in bad faith. It's a legal term for when one party refuses to negotiate reasonably and judges absolutely hate it. I didn't bother with a response. My response was filed the next morning. There was no grand moment in a marble courthouse. The reality of modern law is quieter, more digital, and far more lethal. From my home office, I logged into the state's electronic filing portal, uploaded the meticulously prepared complaint, and paid the filing fee with my credit card. With a final, deliberate click of the mouse, the lawsuit was live. Vance v. Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, et al. The et al. Was important. It meant I wasn't just suing the organization. I was suing every single board member individually. A process server, a retired cop with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, delivered the summons to each of them personally the following day. I can only imagine the shock on their faces when they were handed a legal document that didn't just demand money, but commanded their appearance in court. The game had changed. They weren't dealing with an angry resident anymore. They were defendants in a lawsuit. And with that lawsuit came the onslaught. I immediately served them with my first request for production of documents. In layman's terms, I demanded everything, not just their official records, but every email, every text message, every WhatsApp chat, every note scribbled on a napkin that had anything to do with my property, my father, or the Centennial Oak. I requested all communications between the board members, all communications with their lawyer, and, most importantly, all communications with the tree-cutting company. This is the power of discovery. It's a legal crowbar that pries open secrets. They were now legally obligated to turn over anything I asked for, as long as it was relevant to the case, and I had made sure everything was relevant. A month later, I sat down for the deposition of Karen Bingham. We were in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm downtown. Karen sat across from me, flanked by her lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who looked far less confident now that he was in a formal legal setting. A court reporter sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, ready to capture every word for the official record. I was calm, polite, and methodical. My goal wasn't to fight with her. It was to get her to build her own cage, lie by lie. "Good morning, Mrs. Bingham," I began. "Could you please state your full name for the record?" She did, her voice tight. "And you are the president of the Oak Ridge HOA, correct?" "Yes." I walked her through the basics, establishing the timeline. Then I moved to the heart of the matter. "Mrs. Bingham, in a recorded phone call, on the day the tree was removed, you stated that multiple warnings had been sent to my residence. Is that correct?" Henderson shifted nervously. "Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence." "I'll rephrase," I said smoothly. "Do you recall telling me that multiple warnings were sent?" Karen glared at me. "Yes, they were." "Excellent," I said, making a note. "Could you provide the dates on which these warnings were mailed?" "I don't recall the exact dates." "Do you have copies of these warnings?" "They're in our files somewhere, I'm sure," she said dismissively. "But you have not produced them in discovery, have you?" "We're still looking." It was a weak lie, and we both knew it. I moved on. "You also stated that the tree was a potential hazard to the public sidewalk. Is that your testimony today?" "Yes, the roots were causing damage." "Did you commission a report from a certified arborist to confirm this danger?" "It was obvious," she snapped. "We didn't need a report." "So, to be clear for the record, no arborist ever inspected the tree and deemed it a hazard before you had it removed?" She hesitated, looking at her lawyer, who gave a slight, helpless shrug. "No," she finally admitted. I continued like this for an hour, calmly walking her through every claim she had made. With each question, the cage got smaller. By the end, she was visibly flustered, her answers short and clipped. She had officially committed all of her lies to the court record, under oath. The real prize, however, arrived a week later. A large box landed on my porch, filled with documents and a USB drive. It was the HOA's discovery production. Their lawyer had clearly been overwhelmed. He had dumped thousands of pages of emails and files on me, probably hoping I'd never be able to sort through them all. He was wrong. This was my Super Bowl. I spent the next 2 days glued to my monitor, fueled by coffee and a cold sense of purpose. I sifted through endless chains of petty squabbles about holiday decorations and lawn maintenance. It was a mountain of digital garbage. And then, in the early hours of the second morning, I found it. It was an email chain with the subject line, "Oak Problem." It was between Karen Bingham's personal email account and an account belonging to a man named Frank, who I quickly discovered was the owner of the tree cutting company, and her cousin. The first email was from Karen, dated 3 months ago. "Frank, we need to get rid of that ugly oak at 121. It's ruining the view from my new sunroom. The old man who lives there will never put up a fight. What's the cheapest you can do it for if we pay cash?" Frank's reply, "K, it's a big one. Protected too, I think. Could be trouble." Karen's response was the smoking gun. It was the key to the entire case. "Don't worry about that. I'll handle the paperwork. We'll say it's a hazard. Just get it done quickly one morning before anyone can object. I want that view cleared before my garden party next month." I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. I read the email again, and then a third time. It was all there. The motive, the conspiracy, the malice, the fraud. This was never about a bylaw or property values. It was about a sunroom. Karen Bingham hadn't just destroyed my family's legacy for her own selfish vanity. She had conspired with her cousin to do it, knowingly breaking the law in the process. The $50,000 I had demanded suddenly felt too low. The email chain was more than a smoking gun. It was a tactical nuclear weapon. I had her, cold. The conspiracy, the motive, the fraud, it was all there in black and white. My first instinct was to file a motion for summary judgment immediately, to end the case right then and there. But I held back. A victory in a closed courtroom wouldn't be enough. Karen Bingham hadn't just broken a law. She had terrorized my father and shattered a piece of my family's soul for her own vanity. She had laughed at our pain in a public meeting. Justice, I decided, needed to be as public as her arrogance. I saved the email chain to a secure folder, labeling it the kill shot. I would wait for the perfect moment to deploy it. I didn't know that Karen, squirming under the pressure of the lawsuit, was about to hand me that moment on a silver platter. The legal pressure was clearly getting to her. My relentless discovery requests were forcing her and the board to spend hours digging through records. The depositions had exposed their lies under oath. Their small-time lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was completely out of his depth and was likely billing them a fortune for his incompetence. The walls were closing in, and Karen was panicking. Like all bullies, when faced with a superior force, she didn't stand and fight. She looked for a weaker target. She went after my father. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. David was in the backyard, tending to my mother's old rose bushes. It was the first time since the tree was cut down that I'd seen him show an interest in the garden. It was a small, fragile sign that he was beginning to heal. He was humming to himself, the sun warm on his back, finding a small measure of peace in the familiar work. He didn't hear the car pull up, but he heard the slam of the door and the crunch of angry footsteps on the gravel driveway. He turned, his heart giving a painful lurch. It was Karen Bingham. She wasn't the composed, smug president from the board meeting. Her face was pale, her hair was a mess, and her eyes had a wild, desperate look.
She marched into the backyard, violating the private sanctuary of his garden as easily as she had violated our front lawn. "David," she began, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "We need to talk." My father stood up slowly, his gardening gloves feeling flimsy and useless. "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Karen. You should speak to my son's office." "Oh, I am sick of your son and his office," she spat, taking a step closer. "Do you have any idea what you two are doing? Do you know what this lawsuit is costing the neighborhood? Your neighbors?" My father stood his ground, though his hands had begun to tremble. "This is between you and us, Karen. You're the one who cut down our tree." "It was a community decision," she lied, her voice rising. "And now, because of your son's greed, we are going to have to levy a special assessment. Every single one of your neighbors is going to have to pay thousands of dollars for his legal fantasy. Do you know what that will do? They will hate you. You'll be pariahs. No one will speak to you. Is that what you want for your golden years? To be the most hated man on the block?" It was a vile, cruel tactic. She was trying to weaponize his neighbors against him, to isolate him, to make him feel the social pressure she could no longer exert legally. My father felt a wave of fear, but something else rose with it. A fierce, protective love for me. He knew what she was doing. She couldn't beat me in court, so she was trying to hurt me through him. In that moment, a quiet clarity cut through his fear. His phone was in his shirt pocket. His hands were shaking, but he reached for it slowly, as if to check the time. He fumbled with the screen, his thumb hovering over the voice memo app. He'd seen me use it before. With a silent prayer, he pressed the red record button and slid the phone back into his pocket, the microphone pointed directly at her. Seeing his apparent frailty, his silence, Karen took it as weakness. She moved in for the kill. "This is all on you," she snarled, her voice now shrill. "You and that arrogant son of yours. You think you're so smart with your legal tricks. But I live here, I run this place, and I can make your life a living hell in ways no court can touch. You will regret this. I will personally see to it that every day you live in this house is miserable." She was ranting now, her face contorted with rage, spitting out threats and insults, and my father's phone was capturing every single damning word. Finally, spent and shaking with her own fury, she spun around and stormed off, leaving my father standing alone among the roses. He stood there for a long moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was trembling, but not from fear anymore. He pulled out his phone and looked at the screen. The timer was still running. He pressed stop and saved the file. He named it simply Karen. He walked inside, his steps more certain than they had been in weeks, and called me. "Alex," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I think I have something you need to hear." He sent me the file. I listened to it in my office, my knuckles turning white as I gripped my desk. The cold, professional anger I had felt for weeks evaporated, replaced by a white-hot, protective rage. She had threatened my father. She had come into his home, his sanctuary, and tried to terrorize a frail elderly man. The lawsuit was no longer just about a tree or a sum of money. It was about to become a public execution, and I had just been handed the executioner's axe. Karen's threatening rant in my father's garden was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the proof of her malice, captured in high-fidelity audio. Any competent lawyer would have advised her to settle immediately, to cut her losses and disappear. But Karen Bingham was neither competent nor well-advised. Blinded by her rage and completely unaware that her tirade had been recorded, she doubled down. She called an emergency community meeting. The stated purpose, according to the hastily printed flyers taped to every lamppost, was to vote on a critical special assessment to fund the HOA's unforeseen legal defense needs. She was trying to make my neighbors pay for her war. She thought she could control the narrative, that she could paint herself as the victim and me as the greedy villain bankrupting the community. It was a bold, desperate move, and it was exactly the public stage I needed. The community clubhouse was packed. It felt more like a trial than a meeting. The air was thick with tension, confusion, and resentment. People who had lived side by side for decades were now looking at each other with suspicion. I saw my father seated in the front row, looking frail but resolute. George Peterson was right beside him, his arms crossed, his expression grim. I took a seat in the back, a slim laptop bag at my feet. I was content to watch. For now. Karen took the stage, flanked by her nervous-looking board. She gripped the lectern, her knuckles white. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice straining to sound reasonable. "I know there are a lot of rumors flying around, so I wanted to speak to you directly. As you know, our community has been targeted by a frivolous and predatory lawsuit." She launched into a 15-minute performance, a masterclass in deflection and victimhood. She portrayed me as an outsider, a big-city lawyer trying to extort money from their quiet suburb. She painted my father as a confused old man being manipulated. She spoke of her own selfless volunteer hours and the personal toll this had taken on her. "This lawsuit isn't just an attack on me," she declared, her voice rising with manufactured passion. "It's an attack on all of us, on our property values, on our way of life. That is why the board is asking you tonight to stand with us, to approve this special assessment so we can fight this together and send a message that our community will not be bullied." A smattering of applause came from her loyalists, but most of the room was silent, their faces a mixture of doubt and worry. They didn't want to pay for her fight. Karen finished her speech and opened the floor for questions. This was my cue. I stood up from the back of the room. A murmur went through the crowd as all eyes turned to me. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the tense silence. "That was a very compelling story, Karen," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the room. "But it's not the true one. I think our neighbors deserve to hear the truth." "You are out of order," she shrieked, her composure cracking instantly. "This is a community meeting, not your personal stage." "I am a member of this community," I replied, stopping directly in front of the stage. "And you've been talking about me for 15 minutes. I think I'm entitled to a rebuttal." I turned to face the crowd. "Before you vote on handing Karen and this board thousands of your hard-earned dollars, there are a few things you need to see, and a few things you need to hear." I opened my laptop and connected it to the projector that Karen had been using for her presentation. Her face, frozen in a mask of outrage, was replaced by the familiar layout of an email inbox. "Karen told you this lawsuit was frivolous," I said. "She told you the board acted to remove a hazardous tree for the good of the community. This is an email she sent to her cousin, the man who owned the tree-cutting company, 3 months ago." I clicked, and the email filled the screen. The room was silent as they read. "Frank, we need to get rid of that ugly oak at 121. It's ruining the view from my new sunroom. I'll handle the paperwork. We'll say it's a hazard. Just get it done quickly. I want that view cleared before my garden party next month." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock and understanding. People turned to look at Karen, their expressions shifting from doubt to dawning fury. Her face had gone chalk white. That's taken out of context, she stammered, but her voice had lost all its power. Is it? I asked quietly. Because it seems very clear to me. This was never about a hazard. It was about your sunroom. But let's talk about bullying. I closed the email window. Karen has portrayed my father as a confused man and herself as the victim of harassment. A few days ago, she came onto our private property, uninvited, to confront my father while he was alone. I clicked another icon. A sound wave graphic appeared on the screen. My father was frightened, I said, my voice dropping. But he had the presence of mind to do this. I hit play. Karen's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the silent room. I can make your life a living hell in ways no court can touch. You will regret this. I will personally see to it that every day you live in this house is miserable. The audio played on. Every threat, every insult, every ounce of her cruelty echoed off the clubhouse walls. No one moved. No one breathed. They just listened, their faces hardening into masks of cold, silent rage. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was heavier and more damning than any shout could ever be. I looked at my father. Tears were streaming down his face, but he was smiling. Karen was staring at the screen, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. She was broken. Then a final voice cut through the silence. It was George Peterson standing up from his seat in the front row. And I'd like to add one more thing, he said, his voice ringing with the authority of a lifetime of expertise. That tree wasn't just a tree. It was a designated heritage tree protected by the town charter. Removing it wasn't just a mistake, it was illegal. By acting with such reckless incompetence, this board hasn't just exposed themselves to a lawsuit. They've exposed every single homeowner in this community to massive potential fines from the town. The special assessment she wants you to approve, it's not to fight a lawsuit, it's to cover up her crimes. That was it. The dam broke. The room erupted not in shouts, but in a low, furious roar of betrayal. All the anger and resentment that Karen had cultivated for years, all the fear she had used to rule, turned back on her in an instant. Her board members physically backed away from her at the table, their faces pale with panic, trying to distance themselves from her toxicity. People were standing up, pointing, their voices overlapping in a chorus of condemnation. "Resign!" someone shouted. "Fraud!" yelled another. Karen Bingham stood alone on the stage, bathed in the glow of the projector, utterly and completely destroyed. Her kingdom had crumbled. Her power was gone. She was no longer a president or a tyrant. She was just a small, pathetic woman who had made the fatal mistake of cutting down the wrong man's tree. The chaos in the clubhouse wasn't a riot. It was a revolution. The furious, betrayed voices of the community washed over Karen Bingham in a tidal wave, stripping away the last vestiges of her power. She didn't make another excuse or utter another word. She simply stumbled off the stage, her face a blank mask of shock, and fled out a side door, disappearing into the night. She was finished. In the immediate aftermath, a sense of stunned liberation filled the room. The first official act of the impromptu meeting was a unanimous vote of no confidence in the entire board. Barry and Cynthia, seeing their own necks on the line, resigned on the spot. A temporary committee was formed with George Peterson reluctantly but dutifully agreeing to act as its interim head. The community, fractured by fear for so long, had begun to heal itself. My work, however, was not quite done. The next morning, I forwarded the email chain and the audio file of Karen threatening my father to the HOA's insurance company with a simple 2-sentence cover letter. Here is the evidence of bad faith and conspiracy you will be presented with in court. My client's settlement offer of $50,000 is available for the next 48 hours before we amend our complaint to include significantly higher punitive damages. It didn't take 48 hours. It took less than 3. The call came from a senior partner at a large downtown law firm, a man with a weary, professional voice who had clearly been hired to clean up the mess. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Vance," he said, "we have reviewed the evidence. We will be wiring the full $50,000 to your client's account this afternoon. Please send over the settlement paperwork. There was no negotiation. There was no argument. The evidence was so absolute, so damning, that fighting it would have been professional malpractice. The first battle was officially won. But Karen's consequences weren't merely financial. George Peterson, true to his word, presented the town planning board with a full account of what had happened, including the violation of the Heritage Tree Charter. The town launched its own formal investigation. Karen and her cousin Frank were now facing significant fines and potential criminal charges for conspiracy and illegal destruction of protected town property. Her public humiliation was now a matter of public record. A few weeks later, a very different kind of truck rolled down our street. It was a massive flatbed carrying a single magnificent young oak tree. It wasn't as large as the one we had lost. Nothing could be. But it was beautiful, its branches reaching towards the sky, full of life and promise. I stood with my father on the lawn as the crew carefully lowered the tree into the ground where our old friend had once stood. It was a quiet, solemn moment. My father reached out and placed a hand on its smooth young bark. "It's not the same," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "No, it's not," I said, putting my arm around his shoulders. "It's something new. It's a new legacy." He looked at me, his eyes clearer than they had been in years. "Your mother would have been so proud of you, Alex. Not for the money, but for this, for fighting for what was right." That, I realized, was the only victory that truly mattered. The settlement money sat in my client trust account, a silent testament to the battle we had won, but it never felt like our money. It felt like blood money, paid for the loss of something irreplaceable. I knew I couldn't keep it. At the next official HOA meeting, with a new, duly elected board of decent, responsible neighbors at the helm, I made a proposal. The money we won was a punishment for an injustice, I told the assembled community. But justice isn't just about punishment. It's about building something better so that the injustice can never happen again. I announced that I was using a portion of the funds to cover the cost of the new tree and my legal filing fees. The rest, over $25,000, I was donating to the community under one condition, that they use it to establish the Oak Ridge Legacy Fund. The fund's purpose was twofold. First, it would be used to plant and maintain trees and green spaces throughout the neighborhood, ensuring our community's natural beauty was protected for generations to come. Second, and more importantly, it would provide a legal defense resource for any resident who was being unfairly targeted or bullied by a future board. It was an insurance policy against another Karen Bingham ever rising to power. The motion passed with a unanimous emotional vote. The final scene of this story isn't one of courtroom drama or public humiliation. It's a quiet evening, months later. I'm sitting with my father on our porch. The air is warm and the leaves of the new oak tree rustle in the gentle breeze. My father looks happier and healthier than he has in years. The neighborhood is at peace. The fear is gone, replaced by a renewed sense of community. He looked over at me, a soft smile on his face. "You know," he said, "I think the view from here is even better than it was before." And in that moment, I knew he wasn't talking about the sunroom. He was talking about the view of a world set right. A world where bullies don't win, where justice prevails, and where the destruction of one old tree could give birth to an entire forest of hope.